Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, I'm Peter Lindstrom, and I will call the Environment Committee for May 14th, 2024 to order. Really excited to have a full house here today and to have this agenda before us. So without any changes, we'll move forward with this agenda. First thing up, we have the minutes from April 23rd, 2024. Is there any changes to these minutes or any motion to approve has been made in a second?
Second.
Second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Carries. That takes us to one item on our consent agenda, which is 2024-120, Emergency Underground Excavation Services. Mr. Tierney, he is with us, but it's on our consent agenda, so we can just move forward. Is there a motion to, we're just rocking and rolling here.
So moved.
Motion has been made and has been seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Carries. That takes us to our first non-consent agenda item, which is one of my favorite programs, the Water Efficiency Grant Program. And we have before us a couple of folks who are going to talk to us about the cities that have applied for this and what they have to look forward to. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the council. Thanks for having us today. We've come to you a few times over the last few months to talk about the Water Efficiency Grant Program. We had an information item back in November, and then we came in January as well to talk about the process for putting out for applications and how we were going to go about deciding the awards for the next round of the grant program. And so here we are with the awards. Just to review a little bit, so for this grant program, we have 1.1 million available. That's going to begin in July of this year and go through the end of June in 2026. This award is from the Clean Water Land and Legacy Amendment, and the total award is 1.5 million with 400,000 that we have allocated to an equity pilot program that we're going to be developing with cities later this year. So stay tuned for more announcements about that. We'll definitely be coming to share about that. These awards are for communities that are served by or operate a municipal water system. And when we put out for application, the maximum award possible is 50,000 and 5,000 is the minimum. And as you can see in this table, we require a 20% match from the municipality. So while we are providing, for example, 16,000, the total program is actually to 20,000 with that 4,000 match. So we had a record number of applications, as far as I know, with 41 cities from around the region, totaling 1.3 million requested, so that exceeded how much we had allocated for this grant program. We had 6 new communities: Arden Hills, Centerville, Little Canada, Mounds View, St. Paul, who has sort of participated before through our equity pilot program that we've talked about in the past, and then Vadnais Heights as well. And 34 of those communities are returnees from the current program, so definitely still popular among our participants, and excited to have some new cities applying for this grant. Just to kind of look at where in the region our cities are applying from, it's definitely kind of that first ring suburb is a big area, and that's where we often see high water use, both in the summer and throughout the year, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But as you can see, this is also shows the application order of cities, and the dark blue on this map is a new applicant, and the light blue is past participants. And so, as I said before, St. Paul is technically a new applicant for this type of grant program, that we have done an equity piece with them this past cycle. This is a big table with a lot of requests from each city, so I'll leave it here for a minute, but we had a variety of request amounts from different cities. A lot of them request the max possible, which is 50,000. The lowest request we had was from Centerville for 5,000, and then a smattering in between as well. Lots in the kind of 20s, 30s, 40,000s. So as I mentioned, we had more grant money requested than we have allocated to this program. And so in the past, what we've done when this has been the case, which I think may have been every time, but definitely the last program as well, the amount requested exceeded the funds available. So we use the following criteria to determine what sort of reductions we'll do from the awards. We wanted to make sure that every applicant was able to have their own grant program and to participate. And so rather than turning away applications, we wanted to take this weighting scheme and kind of decide how to reduce accordingly so that all the cities can participate. So the four kind of criteria that we used are residential gallons per capita per day, which is a mouthful, but that's basically in residential water uses, how much is a person using each day. We also looked at the ratio of peak month pumping to winter monthly pumping. So that kind of gets at, when it's really hot outside and people are watering their lawns and taking 2 showers because it's so hot out, what does that look like? We also took into account the number of water supply issues identified in the master water supply plan, and also the order in which applications were received. Historically, we've taken these 4 criteria and weighted them evenly, but as we were thinking about it this time around, we really wanted to get at where the most water is being used. So we had the full weight assigned to the residential per capita use and the peak month to winter month. We slightly reduced the weight of the number of water supply issues. The reason for this is that the master water supply plan is from 2015, and so this hasn't changed as much since then, and also the kind of variability and number of issues isn't as great as looking at the variability in water use or something like that. And then, again, the date of application received, we brought that weight down, so we were focused on where the most use is happening. Again, another table with a lot of numbers, but this looks at, so we took all of the applications that we received from communities, we created scores based on those criteria, and then we calculated the scoring and kind of ranking of the applications. The max possible was 123, with the max score at 114. That was Lake Elmo. The lowest, looks like, was Robbinsdale at 21. And then the awards. So actually, I swapped these accidentally. So the way that we apply the scoring to the requested amounts is that we calculated the scores, and then we took the community score out of the total kind of possible score, and then we had a multiplier that basically brought the total number of awards up to that 1.1 million limit as possible. So just making sure that we can give out as much of the money as we can. As I said before, every municipality that applied received an award, and wanting to focus on the viability of a program, any city that applied for less than 10,000 didn't have any reduction from their program, just to make sure that all of their kind of plans could go forward. So jumping back one slide, these are the way that the awards shook out, and we have a chart that we'll show in a minute, just so it's a little bit more clear. But the thinking about like where those scores were, so Lake Elmo had the highest score, and they requested 50,000, so their award remained unchanged. The lowest award was for 5,000 for Centerville, and they had only applied for 5,000, and so that max and minimum award requirement fit in nicely with the max and minimum actual awards that we're proposing. So here's a chart that looks at the amount requested versus reduction from the amount requested. And so if we're looking at this chart from left to right, The blue shows the granted amount, and then that kind of pink salmon shows the reduction from requested. So on that kind of first half of the left side, you see all the bars going to that top level at 50,000. So that represents cities that requested 50,000, and then depending on what that kind of pink salmon color is, that's how much was reduced from what they applied for. So as you see, the lower that the granted awards are, generally, the lower that the amount was reduced. So next steps for this program, if things move forward as planned, we plan to send award letters to communities on May 24th. And then from there, get grant legal agreements set up, collect signatures from the communities, and then work with our partners in finance to get accounts set up and web grants. And if all goes well, we'll be planning to start grant activities on July 1st of this year. And that helps with cities who are in the current cycle of the program can pretty seamlessly move from one program into the next. So our request today, our proposed action, is that the Metropolitan Council authorize its regional administrator to award and execute the Water Efficiency Grant Program grants recommended in Attachment A in the total amount of $1,097,880. And happy to answer any questions.
Great presentation. Any questions for, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's so great to see that people wanted more money than you had. So engagement must be really being successful, getting the word out. People are saying there's help for us. The one question I have is, why do you, if there's a deadline, why do you care when the application is received? And at 0.25, it just looks like it's more data that you have to collect and deal with. And if they come in on time, they come in on time. So.
Mr. Chair, Council Member, that is a good question. When we set up the criteria for this, we were following criteria that we've used in the past. And I think once we were working on kind of scoring the applications and thinking about that, we agree that, you know, the order in which it happens shouldn't be a strong criteria. So that was part of the reason for bringing that score down. But I think in future programs, we could just eliminate that.
I just, to follow up, just think of any other little step you can delete that to minimize any extra effort when it's not adding value is a good thing to do, so.
Definitely.
Agreed. Councilmember Wolf and then Councilmember Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When we were discussing the split between the regular program and the equity program, it seemed to me like we were looking for what we thought the demand was going to be for the regular program, and then the rest was going to be equity. Since we have more requests than what we had, I kind of want to have a little better understanding of the equity part of it and how cities can get to be, is it going to be one? Is it 10 cities? Just to make sure we're not shorting the regular program in favor of the equity program. So if you could give a little more detail about that, it would be appreciated.
Mr. Chair, Council Member, that's a good question. So our plan for the equity pilot program is that we want to connect with cities and talk about how an equity program can best impact them. I think one reason why we decided to carve this out of the 1.5 million is that because we have this blanket grant program and cities design their own programs, so before applying some sort of criteria for all participants, we wanted to get communities in the room and talk about how our funding can help bring more equitable water efficiency into their communities. So I think that was part of the reason for that. And then the reason why we chose the 1.1 million is that looking at past expenditure from cities in other grant programs, we have had some leftover funds in the past that we can then put into the next program. I think that we don't have the final numbers yet for the current one because we're still waiting on that to finish out, but my guess is that there will probably be funds available that we can put back into the 1.1 million to bring that up if needed. But certainly a lot of cities spend their whole award down, but I would say that not all of them do, and I think sometimes the amount requested doesn't end up being exactly how much is spent.
Follow-up?
Thank you. You didn't really answer the question about the equity program. Is there, I mean, who's invited to the meeting? Have these
Sure.
meetings happened yet?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember, sorry about that. So we don't, right now, we would love to get input from any city that's interested and talk about it. We have a survey out right now to collect interest and ideas from cities. At this point, we haven't set any limits for how many are going to be participating. I think the more the merrier is the way that we're looking at it. And I don't think that, I think that if a city has an existing program, if they have a specific equity initiative that they're interested in, I think they could come to us with that. So the answer is that we're later in this year, probably end of summer and early fall, we're planning on convening with cities, inviting whichever are interested to sit in on that conversation and help shape the program. So the exact number is, to be determined, but I would say the plan is to have that set up later this year.
And Mr. Chair, Councilmember, if I could add to that. So, I mean, we really did try to look at what was requested in the past, and 1.1 seemed like a reasonable number. We hadn't seen that much requests before. We haven't been able to allocate all that. So we made the decision to kind of split it out, and last time around, we split out $250,000 for the equity piece. So we just made that call. We don't know what we'll get. If there's money left over, if we can't spend the money in the equity, we'll also go back to help bump up the numbers for this program. So I think next time around, we'll have a better understanding of what the need is in both areas, and we probably will be able to see if we can get the numbers a little closer.
And any city that is eligible for this program is eligible for the equity piece, right? If they have a subsidized housing development that needs new toilets or whatever, it's open to anybody.
If they meet the criteria that will be established by the group that forms the criteria for the program, correct?
Thank you.
Very good. Councilmember Carter.
That was my question about, what are the typical uses that it's put to? And has that changed like recently, because when they're applying, do they have to indicate the typical use that the funds?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember, yeah, so when cities apply, they, in their application, submit information about what sorts of water-using devices, kind of from our list of eligible options, they're interested in having in their program. And typically that lasts through the course of the program. We've had a few cities that, maybe don't have enough interest from residents for one device, and so then we, complete an amendment to add in another device to their program. But yeah, at the moment, the cities kind of choose a variety of devices from our list of eligible ones. But then the equity pilot program that we did with St. Paul, that was a bit different. We helped fund the installation of advanced metering infrastructure, which basically can help sense water leaks and things like that. So that's not in the current program, but I think building on the success that St. Paul saw with that program, I think as we're having conversations about what an equity program could look like, that might be an option as well.
So you're kind of guiding them and coaching them through the process. They're not just applying, and they don't have to just depend on themselves to come up with what they want to do.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember, yeah, that's right. So we use the Energy Star and WaterSense labels, which are programs by the EPA to help inform what we are offering as like an eligible device. And so cities get to kind of from that list choose what they want.
And Mr. Chair, Councilmember Carter, if I can add, so they choose and they kind of base it on, most of these communities have had these programs in the past, so they kind of know what people are looking for. So they might have, a bigger emphasis on toilet replacement, they might have a larger emphasis on the washing machine or something like that. They kind of base it on what they've had in the past. But they do get the list of all the approved appliances and from us as well, so.
Good questions. Other questions? We're looking for a motion.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Carries. Thank you so much. Keep up the good work.
Thanks.
Good program.
And that takes us to our information item, where I'm so used to saying Ned Smith. The new Ned Smith.
Big shoes to fill.
That's right.
Mr. Gsellmeier, welcome.
Welcome, thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I was trying to think of a good analogy for the transition. Maybe Ned's passed me the ball, I'm trying to make the shot.
Nice.
And maybe that's just me thinking about the Timberwolves and hoping for the best.
Yeah, knock on wood.
Let me just see here. So I'm Matt Gsellmeier, I'm the budget manager in environmental services. I'm here to present this information item to you today. After this, we'll go to our customer communities in 2 to 4 weeks and share a very similar presentation with them. After that, Ned or I will come back in July to share any feedback or budgetary updates based on that meeting. And then, as you know, there's later points in the year where you will adopt our rates, and then the budget will eventually be adopted in December. And our last slide has the calendar dates, so I'll go through that in a little bit as well. So we're looking at a 5.6% municipal wastewater charge increase this year, and that's primarily driven by inflation in labor and contracts, and I'll go into more details of the specifics on that on the next slide. Proud to say that our sewer availability charge is currently flat at 0%. I think this is the 11th year in a row, and I've got a couple slides to share on our SAC reserves and our SAC units, so those are both remaining strong. Industrial waste strength charges is at 7.1%, and I've got a couple slides on that too. That is, as people are doing things like maybe making cardboard or tanning or hides, there's higher strength that's getting dumped into the system, and then it takes additional effort to clean that wastewater, so there's a higher charge for that. And then the permit fees is tied pretty closely to the MWC. It's around 5.8%. So moving on to our the drivers of the 5.6% increase. So the first is labor inflation accounts for 2.4%, and I would say that's largely driven by other inflationary factors we've seen, like the cost of living increase. And so as the unions are coming and negotiating their contracts, they're saying it costs a little bit more. So we're seeing those increases at maybe 1% to 2% higher than what we've seen in other years. So that's a little bit more of the labor cost increase. We're also seeing some increases in our medical costs that are included in that. And we're adding a few positions, which I'll go over on one of the later slides, for things like tribal relations and maintenance work at our treatment plants. Again, I'll go over that in more detail. The contract services is the next piece at 1.2% or $3.4 million. That is primarily two big contracts in there. One is for insurance, so the cost to insure our treatment plants, and then the other thing is our securities contract. So I think we have one more location for a security contract, and then the cost of that is going up. Our industrial charge and charges, that's what we pay for regional administration, for the central office, things like payroll or IS or things like that. They're going up 1.1%. About 50% of their costs are IS, but there's also the labor piece in there as well. So they're also we're accounting for some of the similar labor increases there. We also have other, which is mostly grants, for about $1.7 million. I'll give you a little bit more detail about that when I talk about our sources and uses. And then materials and supplies inflation. So we've been kind of wrestling with that for the last several years, where the cost for a ladder or a hammer or scaffolding or whatever is just higher than it used to be. And so we keep having to increase our budget to be able to pay for those things. We did, as you've probably heard from years past, we had some pretty high increases in our cost of chemicals and the utilities. And so we actually had to do an amendment last year to increase our budget for our chemicals and utilities. And we're seeing a little bit of help there on the cost of our polymers. So we'll take whatever help we can get. So the polymers budget's going down. And the chemicals overall budget's a little bit less in 2025 than it was in 2024. So this is our pie chart, our revenue sources, how we make money. The biggest piece is our municipal wastewater charges. That's what we charge the 111 customer communities. After that, it's the sewer availability charge. That's the connection fee, the one-time connection fee to our wastewater system. That's 14%. After that's industrial waste charges for about 5%. I gave a couple of examples like the cardboard or the, we actually have about 1,000 industrial waste customers, so it's quite a few different things that they do. And then the last is the other 1%. And I would say that is, so 2.4, the one thing we're having this year is $2.4 million of that is use of reserves. So what happened is last year, we received some grant money for Newport and White Bear Lake. So at Newport, I think it's II related. At White Bear Lake, it's studies, I think, work related to water levels. So we got the revenue last year. It's sitting in our reserves. We're planning to spend that money starting in 2025. So that's why we put our $2.4 million use of reserves at that level, because that's where the money's sitting and that's what we'll use to pay for that. The proposed uses by category, the biggest piece here is our debt service. So that is paying for all of our infrastructure, our capital projects. Treating wastewater is very capital intensive. And so every year we take out debt via numerous sources, there's three sources. It's either general obligation bonds or PFA loans, which stands for, drawing a blank right now. Public Facility Authority, Public Finance Authority, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. One of them.
So we have this debt, and we every year we have to make payments on it. So that's a big part. That's the biggest chunk of what we are using our money on. After that, it's salaries and benefits, paying for the people. After that, materials, supplies, and chemicals. So we use a lot of chemicals. The chemical prices have gone up over the last couple of years. So that probably has gone from 7% to 8%. And one thing I probably forgot to mention is this pie chart stays pretty consistent most years. It does not change very much. After that, we have rent and utilities. We're one of Excel's top 10 largest customers. We use a lot of electricity. I think it's around $25 million a year that we spend. A lot of that is lift stations or blowers and aerating wastewater. Those things use a lot of electricity. After that, it's interdivisional services. That's the cost that we pay for the central office, as I mentioned earlier. Then consulting and contractual. So we can't do everything. I mentioned a couple of those things like security or insurance, or it could be hiring somebody to pave a parking lot somewhere that's in bad shape. So all those things add up to another 7%. Then we have PAYGO. That's to help. So you can see we're fairly capital intensive, and PAYGO, pay as you go. That's using operating funds to help pay for things that we might need would normally debt finance. So it helps reduce the pull on your debt. The draw on that. And there's other advantages. So things like our PFA loans might have certain restrictions and criteria where the PAYGO does not have as many. So you have more flexibility there. And then the last other is things like centralized projects, miscellaneous expenses, and a little bit of, some of that's a little bit of that grant spending that I mentioned in Newport and White Bear Lake. So that's pretty much the pie. And then moving on to our labor. So back in the 90s and before that, we had over 1,000 FTEs, full-time equivalents. And right around then, there were some technology improvements that happened. And as we were making those improvements, we were able to reduce some of our headcount at some of our treatment plants primarily. And we stayed pretty steady from 21 through 25 in last recent years. As I mentioned, we were adding some tribal relations positions. Those are pretty interesting. So we're supposed to be working with the tribes as we are, even if we own the land, we need to be communicating with tribes. And so tribal outreach is important. So we're adding a few positions because the land might mean something different to a tribe than it does to us. And so we need to be working closely on that. We are also adding some workforce and equity positions, a few operations positions, and maintenance. So we were trying to really, we've been really proactive in our maintenance program, I would say, over the last couple of years. So making sure everything's in good working order. And then, so moving on to the budget count, our overtime, so we have the budget including overtime. Overtime is flat to last year, so that's good. We're keeping our overtime flat. And just a few of the risk factors that we point out here. So rising wage pressure, so that's something that I mentioned. That's, the unions negotiate that. That's something that might be 1% to 2% higher than we've seen in years past. Medical expenses, that can be hard to control sometimes, what you have to pay for that. And then just other things like attrition is listed here, so big items that might cause changes in the job force. So onto our proposed debt service. So our debt is like having 40 mortgages, really, and we can pay those in, but you have a lot more flexibility with it. So imagine, and they're all 20-year terms. So imagine you have this 20-year term on debt. You could pay it all in year one. You could pay it all in the last year. So we really have to manage it. And then the reason we had a bubble is that during the last recession, some of those payments got moved out a little bit to help with our wastewater rates. And so we had that debt bubble. And then now we're really expecting relatively flat debt service for the next 3, 4, 5 years. I do expect it to increase a little bit after that. And part of that is because our capital program, we have a couple of things going on. One, the capital program is also seeing inflationary increases. So that doesn't just hit on the operating side. We do see that on the capital side as well. There's also the fourth incinerator at the Metro plant. There's also work to be done at the Rogers plant. And so I think those items are going to cause the debt service to increase a little bit in those outer years, but pretty flat still for the next couple of years. So pay as you go, I'll try to share what I think of a quick advantage story of having PAYGO. So we purchased some property from the Girl Scouts in Fridley a couple of years ago, and I think we needed that property for a pipe or a lift station in the area. The Girl Scouts still wanted to use that property and rent it back for a year or two. We needed it longer term. So because of the challenges that we might have faced with financing that with our PFA loan or GO bonds that might have presented because of the requirements, PAYGO is a really nice thing that we were able to use because it doesn't have those requirements. We were able to go out and make that property acquisition. And there's certain, again, PFA has a checklist of items. I believe on the GO bonds, you're really not supposed to be making revenue outside of your typical wastewater use on that. So the PAYGO has really good advantages for us. And then what you see in the blue here, that represents the PAYGO the SAC reserve that we use to fund PAYGO. So we did that to help with rate mitigation. And so basically we used a reserve to help fund PAYGO, and you don't want to keep using your reserve year in and year out. You need to keep that for a rainy day. So we're trying to reduce that use on the reserve, but while still holding our PAYGO constant at 11 million, because there are some really good advantages to that. Wastewater outstanding debt, we have about $1.3 billion worth of outstanding debt. We have a replacement value of around $7 billion. And I think I mentioned our debt's going to go up in 26 to 28, maybe a little bit more in years beyond. Part of that is those capital projects that I mentioned. We do have some good news to share that we did recently issue a $60 million bond, and it was at a 3.5% interest rate. So that's a pretty good interest rate. We're AAA with our bonds. We're quite competitive in that space, and we're still continuing to have really good interest rates there. And then this also assumes 75% of our authorized capital plan will be spent. So we have a very robust capital plan. We can't do all the work that we have in there, and historically we've been able to do about 75%. So that's just noted here as an assumption. So the debt per capita, this will look pretty similar to previous numbers, and that's because NACWA, National Association for Clean Water Agencies, comes out with survey information every 3 years. So the last survey was completed for 2023, but we won't have the results until July of 2024. So we're almost to the point of having new data, but what this will tell you basically is our debt per capita or per person in the Twin Cities, and it's at a really good level competitively. And part of that has to do with the fact that we have the separate stormwater and sewer system. And so some of these other agencies, because of the EPA's I want to make sure I use this word correctly, consent decree, they've had to do other work on their infrastructure over the years to have maybe large holding spaces for their wastewater to really prevent spillovers and things of that nature. So we're in a really competitive state for our debt, and even though we are very capital intensive, and we'll be happy to share the updated information with you when we have that in a couple of months. So here's our historical sewer availability charges. It hasn't increased since 2014. We're at $2,485 per residential equivalent, or assuming about 274 gallons per day. And we have a SAC team, sewer availability charge team, and they determine the units for new businesses and buildings based on use. So for example, a bookstore would pay less in SAC than a sports bar because generally a sports bar might be serving food and drinks and people are using the bathroom more so. But we're really happy to be able to continue keeping the SAC rate flat. So the SAC units, you might, a couple of things, interesting things to point out here. The first is you can see the SAC units, how much it dipped during the last recession in 2008 to 2010. And then you might also be looking and saying, oh my gosh, we went from 27,000 down to around 19,000 this last year. But 19,000 is actually pretty good. It's what we typically plan for in a normal year. And that reduction is probably drawn by increased interest rates in the market. And then also we've seen a reduction kind of across the board. It's almost like we had really high SAC and then now we're kind of coming back down to an average level. We actually are looking out at 2024 already and we're a little bit higher year over year. So I think we're in a pretty good position with SAC, even though it looks like we might be coming down here. So the reserve balance, you can see the impact of the last recession, and then you can also see 2022 to 2023 went down a little. And you might be saying, well, Matt, if you were planning for 19,000 units and you got around 19,000 units, why is that dropping down? And the reason is that we're using some of that SAC reserve to help fund PAYGO. So that money comes from somewhere, it comes from our SAC reserve. So you're seeing a little bit of a drop there, but which is why, we don't want to be too reliant on the SAC reserve, because if and when the next recession comes, you're going to need that money. So we try to really monitor it. But Councilmember Wolf.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just comment on that a little bit since I'm the only one who was here in that dip. But prior to the bottom falling out of the market, there was always this, let's not let the SAC reserve balance get up over 100 million because somebody's going to want to steal it for something else. And we realized pretty quickly that 100 million wasn't enough if things go bad. And when we were at the bottom of that trough, we never thought we'd get back up to 19,000 SAC units ever. So it was really nice to see things recover and refill the coffers. But with using PAYGO, that also gives us a cushion in the future if it does drop, because we've got credit for future payments in that bubble that we've put into the PAYGO. They're accounting for that somewhere, and it stays belonging to SAC. So if needed at some time in the future, you could say, hey, we gave you all this PAYGO, so this year we're not going to make as big of a SAC payment to the operating fund.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Wolf. I think there are a lot of advantages to the way we have our SAC set up and using PAYGO, so I 100% agree with you. So moving on to some comparative information. This is, again, about 3 years old almost now, and we're waiting for the latest National Association of Clean Water Agencies survey results. But as of our most recent NACWA survey, we're 35% lower than the national average. The next survey will come out in July. And the one other thing I'd like to point out here is that, so for example, you see $347 that's listed in this chart for MCES. And that includes not only what the council is charging to the city, but also what the city is passing along to the residents. So for example, I live in Blaine. We charge Blaine. Then Blaine charges me as a resident, and they also include the cost for their own infrastructure and lift stations and things of that nature. And that's how they get to that, whatever rate it is that they charge me as a resident. So then we go out to all of the 111 communities, and we check their websites, survey them, communicate with them, and we come up with what the average is within the Twin Cities region. So we're at a great value. I think we'll continue to be at a great value, and I'm excited for the new survey results to come out and share those with you in the coming months. So moving on to our municipal wastewater charges, we've highlighted 2021 in red, and there's really an interesting story with our municipal wastewater charges. So back when the pandemic hit, we ended up using a lot of reserves to keep our rates at a low level, and we were really conservative with a lot of our numbers because of the uncertainty. And so that sort of put some challenges on us because we probably didn't raise our rates as high as we should have in that 2021 year. So then in 2022 through 2024, it was really a matter of trying to play catch up a little bit for that 2021 year. But not only that, but we also saw really high inflation in chemicals, utilities, materials, and supplies those years. So that's why you see us going from 2% all the way up to 6.8% in 2024. Now we're starting to come back a little bit at 5.6% for 2025, but we're still seeing some of that inflation in labor and in materials as well as contract services. In 2026 and beyond, we're really targeting 4 to 6% increases. I'm hoping while I'm here that at some point we're going to hit a 3, but I don't want to make any promises. But we have the caveat here that it's dependent on inflation and also regulatory requirements. So if there becomes a new regulatory requirement, like for PFAS, forever chemicals, that could be really expensive, and then that could have an impact on rates. So that's why we put that asterisk there, is that something could happen, but we're really trying to stay and target that 4 to 6%. So moving on to our industrial rates, we charge additional for industrial strength that comes into the system, and that's again because it takes more chemicals or oxygen to treat that wastewater. And the strength charge is a little bit higher than the MWC, and part of that is a factor of the cost of our treatment plants versus our interceptors. So when we have that high strength waste coming through the pipe, the higher strength doesn't really, you're still going to have the flow coming through the pipe one way or the other. But when it gets to the treatment plant, it costs additional at the treatment plant to treat it because you have to use that additional chemical or oxygen. So we weight these strength charges based on, their weight is higher based on treatment plant costs than on interceptor costs. So our treatment plant costs are going up a little bit faster than our interceptor costs, and for that reason, you're seeing this be a little bit higher than our MWC. The rest of these charges are pretty in line with our MWC. Some of them are pegged pretty closely to it, and we're not really seeing any other charges that are coming in any higher than what we're seeing kind of across the board. And then the last thing is our rate setting schedule. So we did have our industrial weight workshops. We had 13 people attend on May 2nd in person, and we had 59 people attend on May 9th to the virtual. So I suppose there's a bit of preference for the virtual still. It's really convenient for people. And the workshops went really well. We had somebody come from University of Minnesota and talk a little bit about PFAS and prevention, kind of upstream. So that was cool. I think people really liked that. And again, the workshops went well. Then today we're bringing this to you, the Environment Committee, before we go out and talk to customer communities. So just as an information item to share with you what we plan to share with the communities. And then we will have those customer forums, and I said 2 to 4 weeks. We're going to have a virtual as well as an in-person. And then we will come back on, this is a typo actually, it says June 9th. We'll be back on July 9th. And at that point in time, it'll actually probably be Ned, because I will be in vacation, and as we are transitioning roles, you'll get to see Ned one more time at least in this capacity. And then he'll talk a little bit about the feedback we got from the customers. Then on the 24th, the council will have rate adoption. August 28th will be the preliminary operating budget adoption. And then, as I mentioned earlier, all the way into December is when that final adoption takes place. So that's a little bit about where we're looking at for our rates and charges, and I'll be happy to take any questions you might have.
Question, go for it.
Not really a question, more of a comment. When you mentioned the unions come in here and set their price, it's labor and management that come together to take into account the rise in inflation and the cost of living when they're sitting down together to come up with what is acceptable going forward. I just wanted to clarify that real quick.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I'm actually not a part of those meetings, so that's helpful clarity, and, you know, I know there's a negotiation and there's discussions, and so, I appreciate you correcting if I stated it slightly incorrectly on that. Thank you.
Good catch, thank you. And there's a comment
Just a
from Lisa.
just a typo, I think, under the customer forums, the May 21st is in person, I believe, and June 6th is the virtual.
Right.
Is that right?
Okay, thank you.
Great. Councilmember Carter.
I just had a question. You kept referring to PAYGO, and I wasn't clear. Is that an actual fund, or is that a way of doing operating?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Carter, this is where we use operating funds and we earmark $11 million of operating funds to pay for these capital projects. So it is, and it does have its own fund from a fund accounting standpoint where that, we have 3 separate funds to help pay for capital. We have our GO bonds, our Public Finance Authority, and our PAYGO. But that PAYGO money does come from primarily operating, but also some from the SAC reserve to help fund those capital projects. And it's to help with rate mitigation and help us with not taking out too much debt.
So it's an in-house fund, it's not a separate entity that you're borrowing from?
That's correct.
Okay. Thanks.
Great question. Other questions, comments? We will hear more about this in the months ahead. Excellent. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And that takes us to our general manager's report.
So I just want to let you know that we've got a policy meeting coming up. You're invited to attend. We've done 2 so far, and there's one on Thursday in Shoreview from 1 to 3. And we're basically going through what you've already gone through with Jen and folks, letting them know what we've got for policies and giving them a chance to give us input and comments. They've been well attended. The one last week, we had a pretty full room over in Minnetonka, Chanhassen. Where were we? It was way to the west.
Tell us you don't know the West
It was an
Metro.
hour drive. And I'm like, are we still in the region?
It was in South Dakota.
Close enough.
Close enough.
I stand corrected. Sorry about that. You're welcome to come. We think, you know, we only do this every 10 years, right? So it is a big deal, and we're trying to make sure that we reach people and give them ample opportunity to comment before we come out with those final drafts. And I think that's the key change that we've emphasized as we've looked at how can we do this in a more inclusive way. It's also more inclusive within the council. So there's a lot more exchange going on between the different divisions, and I think it shows in the policy work that we have. So
I will
Your
be there on Thursday.
your support's appreciated. Staff really do notice the support that you've been giving them, and I thank you for that.
Excellent. Other comments from council members? We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.